In 1880s America, the average industrial worker earned just $2.50 per day while witnessing millionaires throw parties where guests wore beehive headdresses made entirely of diamonds. Meanwhile, in the same cities, 675 workers died every week in horrific industrial accidents, with their employers simply replacing them without a second thought. Quick subscribe reminder if these work for you. Also, what time is it where you are? Comment your city. Reading through and seeing Oslo, Orlando and Oregon all listening to the same thing at completely different times of day is honestly kind of cool, so we're heading to the Gilded Age tonight. But first though, get comfortable. Seriously, take a second. Adjust whatever needs adjusting. You're not going to want to move once we start. The year is 1887. The first light of dawn is just beginning to filter through the single grimy window of your tenement apartment. Not that you can really call it an apartment, it's more like a box, a single room, maybe 300 square feet that somehow has to house your entire family. You're waking up to the smell of cabbage from last night's soup still hanging in the air, mixed with something worse, the unmistakable stench of sewage backing up from the single toilet shared by all 20 families on your floor. Your back aches from sleeping on the hard floor. The single mattress is occupied by your parents and 2 youngest siblings, while you and your 3 other siblings make do with blankets on the bare wooden planks. Unlike your cozy bed right now, with its soft mattress and clean sheets, you're lying on rough boards with splinters that catch on your clothes. Every time you shift positions, the entire floor creaks, threatening to wake everyone else. And unlike your quiet bedroom, the walls here are paper thin. You can hear Mr. Kowalski next door coughing up what sounds like a lung. The man works in the coal yard, and his hacking cough has been getting worse for months. Someone's baby is crying 3 doors down. Someone's always crying. You might be thinking, surely this place can't be that bad. But wait till you hear this. In a typical tenement building on New York's Lower East Side, each floor might house 20 families. That's over 100 people sharing a single bathroom, a single water source. Can you imagine waiting in line every morning just to fill a bucket with water so your family could wash their faces? And the buildings themselves. Pure death traps, constructed fast and cheap, with almost no regulations, no fire escapes, narrow hallways, rotting wood. When fires broke out, and they did constantly, families had almost no chance of escape. In 1882, over 35,000 people died in tenement fires alone. That's nearly 100 people every single day, burning to death because some rich landlord didn't want to spend money on basic safety. Your stomach rumbles and you realise you're hungry. Again, you're always hungry these days. Food costs eat up almost all of your family's income. A loaf of bread costs about 5 cents, which doesn't sound like much until you realise your father only makes about $1 a day at the factory. After paying 30 cents a day for this miserable room, there's barely anything left for food, let alone clothing or medicine. Speaking of medicine, your youngest sister has been coughing for weeks, the same cough that killed the Murphy kids down the hall last winter. Tuberculosis. They called it consumption because it literally consumed you from the inside out. 1 in 5 children in these tenements died before their 5th birthday. The grim reality is she probably won't make it to spring. Your mother stirs on the mattress, her body already weary though the day hasn't even begun. She works as a laundress, scrubbing wealthy people's clothes for pennies. Her hands are raw and cracked from the lye soap, red and swollen knuckles that never fully heal. You watch as she quietly gets up, careful not to wake the others. She has to start the day's work before anyone else because the washboard in the hallway is shared by 5 families, and if she doesn't claim it early, she won't get her turn. "You up already?" she whispers, noticing your open eyes. "Couldn't sleep. you mumble. The Rosenbergs were fighting again. She nods, understanding. Better get dressed. Factory whistle blows in an hour. You're only 12, but you've been working at the textile mill for 2 years now. Your job is to crawl under the massive looms when threads get tangled or broken, fixing the problem before the foreman notices. Just last week, Sammy from down the block lost 3 fingers when a loom started up while he was under it. The factory owner just docked his pay and told him to be more careful next time. You're terrified every time you have to crawl under those machines, but what choice do you have? Your family needs every penny. Outside, the streets are already coming alive. The clip-clop of horse hooves on cobblestones, the shouts of vendors setting up their carts. The smell is even worse out here. Horse manure piled up everywhere, garbage rotting in the gutters. In summer, the stench becomes unbearable. Disease spreads like wildfire. Cholera, typhoid, dysentery. They sweep through these neighbourhoods regularly, claiming thousands of lives. You step carefully to avoid the worst of it, making your way toward Grand Street. As you turn the corner, you catch sight of something that makes your breath catch. A gleaming black carriage with gold trim pulled by 4 perfectly matched white horses. The wealthy are heading home after a night of revelry uptown. Through the carriage window, you glimpse a woman in a dress that probably cost more than your family will earn in 5 years. She's wearing diamonds in her hair, around her neck, dripping from her ears. For a brief moment, your eyes meet. There's no recognition there, no acknowledgement. To her, you might as well be invisible. And that's the thing about the Gilded Age. The contrast is everywhere, impossible to ignore. While you're crammed into a single room with 7 other people, the Vanderbilts have just completed their summer cottage in Newport, Rhode Island, a 70-room mansion with gold leaf ceilings and indoor plumbing that cost the equivalent of $300 million in today's money. While your sister slowly dies of a preventable disease, the wealthy are throwing parties where they serve champagne in solid gold goblets and hire orchestras to play while they dine. At one famous party, socialite Alva Vanderbilt spent what would be equivalent to $6 million today on a single night's entertainment. Your stomach growls again, louder this time, and you realise you should have grabbed a piece of bread before leaving, but there might not have been any left. Food runs out quickly in your household, especially toward the end of the week when payday is still days away. The factory looms ahead, a massive brick building belching black smoke into the already hazy sky. Even from here you can hear the thunderous roar of machinery, hundreds of looms working in concert, producing fabrics that will be turned into fine clothes for people who will never know your name. As you approach, you see other children trudging toward the entrance, some as young as 6 or 7, their small bodies already bent with fatigue. None of you speak. What is there to say? This is life. This is survival. The foreman stands at the door, checking pocket watches against the large clock mounted above the entrance. If you're even 1 minute late, he'll dock your pay. 3 minutes late, and you might lose your job entirely. There's always someone else desperate enough to take your place. "You Jenkins!" he shouts at a boy who can't be more than 8. "You were 2 minutes late yesterday. That's a penny off your day's wage." The boy doesn't protest. No one does. What would be the point? You file inside, the heat and noise immediately enveloping you. The air is thick with cotton fibres that coat your lungs a little more each day. Old-timers at the factory call it white lung. After 10 years or so, it becomes harder and harder to breathe. By 40, most textile workers are dead or dying. You make your way to your station, where the massive iron loom awaits. It stands 3 times your height, a monster of metal and wood and thread. The floor beneath it is stained dark in places, blood from previous accidents that no one bothered to clean properly. Under, the line manager shouts, pointing at a tangle of threads beneath one of the machines. Without hesitation, you drop to your hands and knees and crawl into the narrow space. The machine continues to operate above you, metal parts slamming together inches from your head. One slip, one moment of bad timing, and you could lose a hand, an arm, your life. You've heard stories about what happens to families when their breadwinners are killed or maimed. No compensation, no help, just eviction when they can't pay rent, children sent to orphanages or onto the streets. Your fingers work quickly, untangling the knot of threads, your heart pounding in your chest. Back on Manhattan's 5th Avenue, just a couple miles from where you're crawling under that loom, Caroline Astor is planning her next grand ball. She's ordering 10,000 exotic butterflies to be released during the evening's festivities. The butterflies cost more than your family will earn in 3 years. This stark inequality isn't just cruel, it's the very definition of the Gilded Age. The term, coined by Mark Twain, refers to something covered in a thin layer of gold to mask what lies beneath. America in the 1880s and 90s was booming with new wealth, new technology, new buildings reaching toward the sky. But beneath that glittering surface was the reality of life for most Americans. Brutal working conditions, grinding poverty, and the daily struggle just to survive. As you finish fixing the tangle and begin to back out from under the loom, you feel a sharp tug on your sleeve. The machine has caught your shirt. Panic floods your system as you frantically pull, feeling the fabric tighten around your arm, drawing you closer to the pounding mechanisms. This is how it happens. This is how children die in these factories every single day. With one desperate yank, you tear free, leaving a piece of your shirt caught in the machine. Your arm is scraped and bleeding, but intact. You're lucky this time. The line manager glances at your injury with complete indifference. Get back to work, is all he says. There are no first aid kits here, no medical attention. If you can still work, you work. Across the factory floor, you see a girl about your age faint from the heat. 2 workers drag her to the side and splash water on her face. She'll be docked pay for the time she's unconscious. If she can't continue, she'll be replaced by tomorrow. And so the day goes on. 12 hours of constant noise, heat and danger. No breaks except a 20-minute lunch period where you gulp down the piece of bread and slice of cheese your mother packed for you. Your water comes from a communal bucket that sits in the corner, gathering dust and lint. Sometimes there are things floating in it that you try not to look at too closely. By the time the final whistle blows, your body aches in ways you didn't know were possible. Your lungs burn from the cotton fibres, your back screams from being hunched over all day, your hands are raw from handling rough materials. And for all this, you'll take home about 30 cents if the foreman doesn't find some reason to dock your pay. The walk home seems longer in the evening. Your feet drag on the cobblestones, each step an effort. The streets are even more crowded now, everyone returning from their various labours. The smell is worse too, the day's heat intensifying the stench of garbage and sewage. As you round the corner to your street, you spot your younger brother sitting on the stoop of your tenement building. He's supposed to be at the glass factory, where he works as a blower's assistant. The fact that he's home can only mean one thing: he's been let go. "Pa's gonna kill me," he says, as you approach, his voice cracking. He's only 10, but there are no tears. Children in the tenements learn early that crying doesn't help anything. "What happened?" you ask, sitting beside him. cut myself on a broken bottle, bled all over the batch. Foreman said I ruined $50 worth of product. He holds up his hand, wrapped in a filthy rag already soaked through with blood. Said I was careless, said not to come back. Your heart sinks. Your brother's wages, meagre as they were, helped put food on the table. Without them, the already thin margin between survival and disaster just got thinner. Inside the building, the narrow hallway is crowded with residents returning from work. The air is thick with cooking smells, cabbage, onions, garlic, and the ever-present undertone of unwashed bodies and sewage. A baby wails somewhere. A couple argues behind a closed door. Normal evening sounds in the tenement. Your apartment is at the end of the hall, one of the worst units in the building because it only has a single window facing an air shaft. Some units have no windows at all, just walls. Imagine living in complete darkness except for the light of a single candle or oil lamp, which you use sparingly because even that small expense adds up. You push open the door to find your mother already at work at the small table that serves as kitchen, dining room and workstation. She's sewing buttons onto shirts, piecework she brings home to earn extra money after her laundry duties are done. Your father isn't home yet. He works at the ironworks, longer hours than almost anyone. Your mother looks up as you enter, her face lined with exhaustion. Her eyes fall on your brother and the bloody rag around his hand. She doesn't ask what happened. She doesn't need to. Without a word, she sets aside her sewing and goes to him, unwrapping the makeshift bandage to examine the wound. It's deep, the kind that needs stitches, but there's no money for a doctor. Instead, she cleans it as best she can with some of their precious clean water and rebinds it with a strip torn from an old sheet. "You'll have to try the shoe factory tomorrow," she says simply. "They're always looking for small hands." And that's how it goes in the tenements. No time for self-pity, no room for despair. You just keep moving forward because the alternative is starvation. Your younger siblings arrive home from their various jobs, one from selling newspapers on the street corner, another from running errands for a local shopkeeper. Each contributes their pennies to the family fund. Even the youngest, just 6 years old, helps by watching the neighbours' children while their parents work. Finally, your father trudges through the door, his face and clothes black with soot from the ironworks. He looks older than his 38 years, his body bent and broken by 2 decades of hard labour. The life expectancy for iron workers in this period is about 42. He's living on borrowed time and everyone knows it. Dinner is a watery soup with cabbage and a few scraps of salt pork stretched to feed 8 people. There's never enough, but no one complains. This is life in the Gilded Age for the working poor. Constant hunger punctuated by moments of near starvation. As you eat, your father notices your brother's bandaged hand. The story comes out in halting sentences. Your father's face doesn't change, but you see something die a little in his eyes. Another setback, another obstacle, another day where the brutal math of survival doesn't quite add up. After dinner, there's more work to be done. Everyone has their task: mending clothes, preparing things for the next day, helping mother with her piecework. Even with everyone working every possible hour, you're still just barely getting by. Through the thin walls, you can hear Mrs. Abramowitz next door coughing. She's been sick for months, probably tuberculosis like so many others. Her husband works double shifts at the meatpacking plant to pay for medicine that doesn't help. Their children, 3 of them under the age of 8, are rail thin from missed meals as every spare penny goes to treatments. This is the reality that hides beneath the gleaming surface of the Gilded Age. While newspapers marvel at the technological wonders of electric lights and skyscrapers, while society pages detail lavish parties where the wealthy serve dinner on solid gold plates, families like yours fight a daily battle just to exist. As night falls and the single oil lamp is lit to save money, your family prepares for bed in the same cramped room where you eat, work, and live. Privacy is a luxury you can't afford. Personal space doesn't exist. You find your spot on the floor, the same hard boards that will make your back ache by morning. Outside, the sounds of the tenement continue. Someone playing a fiddle a few doors down, a baby crying, distant shouts from the street. Through the thin window you can see stars, or maybe they're just the lights of wealthier homes in the distance. Tomorrow will be the same as today, and the day after that, an endless cycle of work and survival with little hope of improvement. This is the American dream for millions of people in the Gilded Age. Not wealth or advancement, but simply making it to the next day. As you drift off to sleep, your body already aching in anticipation of tomorrow's labour, you can't help but wonder about those other Americans, the ones whose parties make the newspaper, whose homes have electricity and running water, whose children don't work in factories. Do they ever think about families like yours? Do they know you exist at all? In their gilded mansions with their diamond tiaras and champagne fountains, do they ever look past the gold plating to see what lies beneath the human foundation upon which their fortunes are built? You'll never know the answer. All you know is that tomorrow the factory whistle will blow at dawn, and you'll be there under the looms risking life and limb for 30 cents a day. Because in the Gilded Age, for families like yours, there simply is no other choice. Your eyelids grow heavy as you sink into your modern, comfortable mattress, so different from the hard wooden floors of those tenement apartments. As you drift towards sleep, safe and warm, remember that the gleaming surface of any golden age often hides the struggles of those who make that prosperity possible. Morning comes too quickly in the tenements. Your body protests as you peel yourself off the hard floor, every muscle aching from yesterday's labour. It's still dark outside, but the building is already alive with movement. Dozens of families rushing to start their day before the factory whistles blow across the city. Your little brother is already up, his injured hand rebandaged with a slightly cleaner rag. Today he'll try for work at the shoe factory 6 blocks away. He's nervous, you can see it in the tight set of his jaw, but there's no choice. A family missing one wage is a family one step closer to the street. "You think they'll take me?" he asks quietly, so as not to wake the others. "Course they will," you say with forced confidence. You're quick with your hands. "Just keep the bad one in your pocket during the interview." He nods, eyes too old for his 10-year-old face. "Pa says if I don't find work today, I gotta try the coal yard tomorrow." Your stomach knots at the thought. The coal yard is where men go to die slow black deaths, their lungs turning to stone over years of breathing dust, but it's always hiring because the turnover is so high. No one asks questions about age when the job is shoveling coal. "You'll get the shoe factory job," you say firmly, ruffling his hair. "Just smile and look strong." Outside, the pre-dawn air is thick with fog and coal smoke, a hazy blanket that never quite lifts from the tenement districts. The streets are already filling with workers, a silent army marching toward the factories and sweatshops that power America's industrial might. Women with shawls pulled tight against the chill, men with lunch pails and grim expressions. Children, so many children, some as young as 5 or 6, trudging alongside their parents or in groups of other child workers. At the corner of Orchard and Delancey, you spot Sadie from the 3rd floor. At 16, she works as a seamstress in one of the Lower East Side's countless garment shops. Her fingers are perpetually pricked and bleeding from pushing needles through tough fabric hour after hour. "Heard about Tommy," she says, falling into step beside you. "My shop's not hiring. I already asked." "He's trying the shoe factory on Essex." Sadie winces. "The one with the basement workroom?" No windows? You nod grimly. Working conditions don't get much worse than windowless basements where the air is thick with leather dust and chemical fumes from the glues and dyes. But again, what choice is there? Hey, did you hear about the Keller place? Sadie asks, changing the subject. What about it? Burned down last night. 4 families got out. 2 didn't. You stop walking for a moment, the news hitting you like a physical blow. Fire is every tenement dweller's nightmare. The buildings are perfect kindling, dried wood, overcrowded with few exits and no safety measures. Once a fire starts, it spreads like, well, wildfire. Jesus, you mutter. Anyone we know? The Russos, I think, and the O'Malleys. The O'Malleys lived directly above your family for 3 years before moving to the Keller building. 5 children. The youngest was just born last spring. All of them? You ask, afraid to hear the answer. Sadie shrugs, but her eyes are damp. Don't know yet. They're still finding bodies. That's how it goes in the tenements. Death is a constant companion, visiting so frequently that you almost become numb to it. Almost, but never quite. You part ways with Sadie at Canal Street, her heading to the garment district, you continuing toward the textile mill. The city is coming alive now, street vendors setting up their carts, shop owners sweeping their storefronts. The contrast between the commercial streets and the tenement blocks is striking. Here there's colour, noise, a semblance of prosperity. As you pass a newsstand, the headlines scream about another millionaire's newest purchase, a yacht that cost more than every building on your block combined. Next to it, a smaller headline notes that 6 children died yesterday in a factory accident upstate. The juxtaposition doesn't seem to bother anyone but you. The mill looms ahead, belching black smoke into the morning sky. The night shift is just ending as you arrive, workers streaming out with hollow eyes and slumped shoulders. They look like ghosts, pale and insubstantial in the growing light. You try not to think about how you'll look the same way 12 hours from now. Inside, the noise hits you like a physical force. Hundreds of looms clacking and slamming, the hiss of steam engines, the shouts of floor managers trying to be heard above the din. The air is thick with cotton fibres that dance in the shafts of morning light streaming through the high windows. It looks almost beautiful until you cough and taste the fibres coating your throat. Under. The familiar command comes before you've even reached your station. You drop to your knees and crawl beneath the nearest loom, where a tangle of threads has halted production. The floor is sticky with oil and sweat. Above you, metal parts slam together rhythmically, each impact sending vibrations through the wooden frame. This is where you'll spend most of your day, in the narrow space beneath these machines, fixing jams, retying broken threads, retrieving fallen bobbins. The space is barely big enough for your small frame. Adult workers can't fit, which is why children are so valuable here. Your small hands can reach places no one else can access. It's also why so many children lose those hands, or arms, or lives. 3 looms down, you spot Ellie, a 7-year-old who started last month. She's tiny even for her age, malnourished like most tenement children. The overseer especially likes using her for the tightest spaces. As you watch, she squeezes into a gap that can't be more than 8 inches wide, her small body disappearing almost entirely beneath the thundering machine. She won't last a month, mutters Daniel, a 13-year-old who works the same row as you. Too small, too slow. He doesn't mean she'll be fired, he means she'll be mangled or crushed. It's a cold assessment, but not inaccurate. The youngest and smallest are always the most vulnerable. Their reflexes aren't quick enough, their judgment not developed enough to recognize danger until it's too late. You finish the repair and scramble out, only to be immediately directed to another jammed loom, and so the day goes. A constant cycle of crawling into danger, working as fast as possible, then moving to the next crisis. There are no breaks except for a 20-minute lunch period. No rest. No respite from the noise and heat and dust. Around midday, it happens. A scream cuts through even the thunderous noise of the mill floor. Everyone freezes for just a second. Workers, floor managers, even the mill owner who happens to be touring the facility with potential investors. 10-year-old Samuel, who works 3 rows over, got his arm caught in a loom. From where you stand, you can see the blood spattering the white cotton. Hear his shrieks as workers rush to shut down the machine. By the time they extract him, the arm is mangled beyond recognition, bone visible through torn flesh. The mill owner, Mr. Harrison, a man who lives in a mansion on 5th Avenue and has never worked a day of physical labour in his life, looks momentarily disturbed. Then he turns to his guests with an apologetic smile. These accidents, regrettable as they are, represent only a small percentage of our operations, he says smoothly. The boy will be compensated, of course. That's a lie. Samuel will receive nothing. By tomorrow, another child will be working his station, and in a week, few will even remember what happened. This is the reality of factory work in the Gilded Age. Human beings are as disposable as the cotton fed into the machines. The investors nod, satisfied, and continue their tour, stepping carefully around the blood still pooling on the floor. No one has taken Samuel to a doctor. He sits in the corner, a rag pressed to what's left of his arm, shock keeping him silent now. At the end of the day, someone will help him home. His family will do what they can, which isn't much. If infection sets in, and it probably will, he'll likely die within weeks. And you? You go back to work. What else can you do? Protest? Walk out? There are 100 desperate children waiting to take your place. Your family needs your 30 cents a day, so you swallow your horror and crawl back under the loom, trying not to think about Samuel's arm or how easily it could have been yours. Lunch comes, stale bread and a small piece of cheese you've been saving all morning. You eat quickly, knowing every minute spent not working is a minute wasted. Around you, other children do the same, some sharing meagre meals with siblings or friends, others making do with nothing but a drink from the communal water bucket. You wonder how your brother is faring at the shoe factory. Did they hire him? Is he already hunched over a workbench in some airless basement? Or is he being turned away, told to try the coal yard where life expectancy is measured in months rather than years? The afternoon drags on, hotter and more suffocating than the morning. The cotton dust seems thicker, the air harder to breathe. Your hands are raw from handling rough materials all day, small cuts stinging with sweat, but you keep working because stopping isn't an option. At one point, Mr. Fleming, the floor manager, comes by to check your work. He's a hard man with permanently furrowed brows and hands like granite from 20 years on the mill floor before being promoted. Faster is all he says, watching you retie a complex knot of threads. 2 minutes per repair, no more. Yes, sir, you mumble, fingers working frantically. He stands over you, pocket watch in hand, timing your progress. When you finish a few seconds over his limit, he makes a note in his book. You know what that means. A penny off today's wages. These small deductions add up quickly, engineered to keep workers perpetually in debt to the company. My sister's sick, you say suddenly, surprising even yourself. Consumption. Doctor costs money. Fleming's face doesn't change. Work faster then, he says simply, and moves on to terrorise the next child. Across the factory floor, through gaps in the machinery, you catch glimpses of the other workers, women at spinning frames, men operating the largest looms, children scurrying beneath it all like mice. Everyone looks exhausted, faces blank, with the special kind of fatigue that comes from repeating the same movements hour after hour, day after day, year after year. By late afternoon, your body is screaming for rest, your back aches from stooping, your knees are raw from crawling on the rough floor, your lungs burn with each breath of cotton-filled air, but the day isn't over. It won't be over until the whistle blows at 7 o'clock, marking the end of a 12-hour shift. "Hey, you hear about the strike uptown?" Daniel whispers during a rare moment when you're both between tasks. "What strike?" "The iron workers, walking out tomorrow, demanding 10-hour days and safety rails on the high beams. Your father works at that ironworks. He hasn't mentioned any strike. They'll just bring in scabs," you say, using the term for replacement workers who cross picket lines. "Always do." Daniel shrugs. "Maybe, but I heard they got the whole neighborhood backing them this time. Even some of the shopkeepers." The conversation ends abruptly as Fleming appears, sending you both scurrying back to your stations. But the thought lingers, workers standing together demanding better conditions. It seems impossible, yet something stirs inside you at the idea. What if things could be different? Finally, the whistle blows, signalling the end of the day shift. Your legs nearly buckle with relief as you stand upright for the first time in hours. Around you, hundreds of workers begin filing toward the exits, a mass exodus of exhausted humanity. Outside, dusk is falling, the streets taking on the blue-grey hue of evening. Your body moves on autopilot, following the familiar route home through neighbourhoods that grow progressively more crowded and run down the closer you get to your tenement. At the corner of Eldridge and Stanton, you spot a familiar figure, your brother, sitting on a crate outside Goldstein's bakery. Your heart sinks. If he were working, he'd still be at the factory. "They wouldn't take me," he says as you approach, holding up his bandaged hand. "Said I was damaged goods." The defeat in his voice makes something twist painfully in your chest. "We'll try the glass factory again tomorrow," you say, though you both know they won't rehire him after the broken bottle incident. "I could try the mines," he suggests, voice small. "They're always looking for trap boys." You grab his shoulder, perhaps too roughly. "No, not the mines." Trap boys work in the deepest, darkest parts of coal mines, sitting alone in the blackness for 12-hour shifts, opening and closing ventilation doors when they hear carts approaching. Many go blind from the constant darkness, others are crushed when support beams fail. Some simply disappear, their bodies never recovered from collapsed tunnels. "We'll figure something out," you promise, though you have no idea what. When you arrive home, the apartment is empty except for your youngest sister, who sits listlessly on the mattress, her cheeks flushed with fever. The consumption is getting worse. You wet a rag with precious clean water and place it on her forehead, murmuring reassurances you don't believe. Your mother returns an hour later, arms laden with other people's laundry, extra work she's taken on to make up for your brother's lost wages. Her hands are red and cracked from lye soap, bleeding in places where the skin has split from constant exposure to harsh chemicals. "Any luck?" she asks. Your brother, though his presence at home answers the question. He shakes his head, unable to meet her eyes. She sighs, setting down the laundry bundle. "Your father heard of something at the glassworks, not on the floor, but in the yard, sorting broken pieces for remelting. It's half what you made before, but it's something." Your brother nods, relief and disappointment warring on his face. "It's dangerous work. Glass cuts can lead to infections that kill as surely as any machine accident, but at least it's income." Your father arrives later, covered in iron dust and moving like a man twice his age. He says nothing about the strike Daniel mentioned, just sinks onto a chair and accepts the bowl of thin soup your mother places before him. After a few spoonfuls, he notices your brother. "They didn't take you," he states flatly. "No, sir." Your father nods once. "Try the glassworks tomorrow. I spoke to Murphy. He needs yard boys." "Yes, sir." The conversation ends there. In working-class families, there's little room for extended discussion or sympathy. Problems are stated, solutions proposed, actions taken. Emotions are a luxury you can't afford. After dinner, such as it is, everyone tackles their evening chores. Your mother sets up her mending station, preparing to work late into the night on garments that pay a few pennies each. Your older sister arrives from her job at the canning factory, fingers stained and blistered from handling hot tins all day. She immediately takes over caring for the sick child, applying poultices and measuring out the cheap medicine that probably does more harm than good. Your father sits at the table, meticulously repairing his work boots with scraps of leather salvaged from the factory floor. Each pair has to last at least a year, preferably 2. New boots would cost a week's wages, an impossible expense. Through the thin walls you can hear the usual evening symphony of the tenement. Babies crying, couples arguing, someone playing a mournful tune on a battered accordion. A normal night in a building housing over 200 souls, all living atop one another in conditions that would make a prison cell seem spacious. As you help your mother with the laundry, something catches your eye outside the single window. A glow in the sky, bright orange against the darkening blue. Another fire somewhere in the warren of tenements that make up the Lower East Side. Another night when families will lose everything, when children might be orphaned or burned alive because landlords won't install fire escapes. You think about the O'Malleys, trapped in the Keller building as flames consumed everything around them. Were they awake? Did they have time to realise what was happening? Or did the smoke take them in their sleep, a merciful end compared to the alternative? These thoughts keep you company as you finish your chores and prepare for bed, claiming your spot on the hard floor. Tomorrow will bring another 12 hours at the mill, another day of crawling beneath thundering machines that could snatch away your fingers, your arm, your life, in an instant. Another day of watching children like Samuel pay the price for America's industrial might. As your eyes grow heavy, you wonder about the future. Will things always be this way? Will your children, if you survive long enough to have any, face the same brutal conditions, the same daily fight for survival? Or is there hope for something better? Some distant day when workers aren't treated as disposable parts in a vast industrial machine? The strike Daniel mentioned flickers in your mind. Workers standing together, demanding change. It seems like a dream, impossible in the face of the overwhelming power held by factory owners and their political allies. Yet something about it calls to you, a fragile spark of possibility in an otherwise bleak landscape. You drift off to sleep with that spark still glimmering faintly, a tiny light against the darkness of industrial America. Outside, the glow of the tenement fire continues to colour the night sky, a reminder of how quickly everything can be lost in the Gilded Age. As you lie in your comfortable modern bed, so different from the hard floors of those tenement apartments, consider how many of our basic protections, minimum wage, child labour laws, workplace safety regulations, didn't exist for these families. Their suffering and eventual organising help create the standards we now take for granted, paid for with countless lives lost to unsafe conditions and brutal labour practices during America's rapid industrialization. While millions struggled in urban tenements, a different kind of hardship was unfolding across America's vast farmlands. Let's shift our gaze westward, away from the crowded streets of New York to the open plains of Kansas, where the challenges were just as brutal but wore a different face. Dawn breaks harsh and unforgiving over the prairie farmhouse. Unlike the dim morning light filtering through tenement windows, here the sun arrives with blinding intensity, already hot though it's barely cleared the horizon. You've been awake for an hour already, feeding chickens and milking the cow before the day's real work begins. The farmhouse is simple. 2 rooms downstairs, a sleeping loft above. It's not much, but compared to a tenement apartment, it feels like a palace. Space is the one luxury farm families have in abundance. Everything else, money, food security, protection from the elements, is just as precarious as for their urban counterparts. You splash water on your face from the basin on the porch. The water comes from the well you dug by hand 3 years ago, 60 feet down to hit the water table. Every drop is carried up in buckets, making it precious in ways city dwellers with access to public pumps might not understand. Your father is already in the fields, a distant figure against the endless horizon. He's been checking the wheat, looking for signs of the rust disease that destroyed half your crop last year. From his slumped shoulders as he returns to the house, you can tell the news isn't good. Grasshoppers, he says simply, dropping heavily onto the porch step beside you. Western edge of the field, thousands of them. Your stomach knots with dread. A grasshopper plague can strip a field bare in days. 2 years ago, swarms so thick they blotted out the sun devoured every green thing for miles. Crops, grass, leaves on trees, even the clothes hanging on lines. People found them in their hair, their mouths, their beds. The memory still haunts your dreams. How bad? You ask, afraid to hear the answer. Bad enough. We'll lose that section for sure. He rubs his weathered face with calloused hands. At 45, he looks 60, aged prematurely by sun and worry. Might still save the rest if we act fast. And just like that, the day's plans change. Instead of repairing the barn roof, you'll spend hours frantically digging trenches and lighting smoky fires to drive back the insects. It probably won't work. Nothing really stops a determined grasshopper swarm, but you have to try. That wheat represents everything. Next year's seed, this year's loan payments, food for the winter, shoes for your younger siblings. Your mother appears in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. Like your father, she's aged beyond her years. At 39, her once auburn hair is streaked with grey, her face lined from squinting into prairie winds and worrying about crop prices. "Grasshoppers again?" she asks, having overheard. When your father nods, she just sighs. "I'll get the kerosene for the trenches. Sarah, put on the big pot and start soaking beans. We'll need to feed everyone at midday." No one panics, no one cries. Farm families face disaster with the same stoic resignation as their urban counterparts. Natural calamities are just part of life. Drought, floods, blizzards, insect plagues. You endure what comes because there's no alternative. Within an hour, everyone is mobilised. Your younger brothers run between house and field carrying water and supplies. Your sisters prepare food and gather kerosene-soaked rags. Even Grandpa, whose arthritis barely lets him walk most days, sits on a stool sharpening shovels and hoes for the trench digging. The summer sun climbs higher, baking the prairie. By mid-morning, it's nearly 100 degrees. The air so dry, it sucks moisture from your skin. Sweat evaporates almost instantly, leaving salt crusts on your clothes. You dig until your blisters form, then break, then bleed. Still, you keep digging. This is farm life in the 1880s. Constant physical labour from dawn till dusk. Your body is a tool, and like any tool, it wears down with use. By 30, most farmers have permanently damaged backs, arthritic joints, hernias from lifting too much weight. But you can't stop. The land demands its due. "Mails here," calls your youngest sister around noon, running toward the fields with an envelope clutched in her hand. The rural free delivery has just started reaching farms like yours, bringing news, usually bad, from the outside world. Your father takes the letter, his face darkening as he reads. "Bank's calling in part of the loan early," he says finally. "Need $500 by end of month." $500 might as well be $5 million. Last year's wheat sold for 63 cents a bushel, down from nearly $1 5 years ago. Corn prices have fallen even more dramatically. The money from your entire harvest won't cover this loan payment, let alone provide for the family's needs through winter. "We could sell the back 40, your mother suggests quietly. "And plant what next spring?" your father counters. "Sell that land, and we might as well sell it all." This is the invisible adversary that haunts farm families throughout the Gilded Age, crushing debt. While urban workers struggle with immediate survival from one day to the next, farmers face a slower, more insidious form of economic strangulation. It wasn't always this way. After the Civil War, the government encouraged westward expansion. Promises of free land under the Homestead Act drew thousands of families to stake claims on the frontier. Banks offered easy credit for equipment and seed. Railroad companies painted rosy pictures of fertile lands and ready markets. What no one mentioned was how the system was rigged against small farmers from the start. The railroads charged exorbitant rates to ship crops to market. Banks set impossible terms on loans. And as more land came under cultivation, both in America and globally, crop prices began a decades-long decline that pushed families like yours to the brink of ruin. "Could try for work at the Jensen place," you suggest. "They're looking for harvest help." Your father's jaw tightens. The Jensens used to be small farmers like yourselves until last year when they lost their land to the bank. Now they manage a massive operation owned by Eastern investors who never set foot on the property. Working there would feel like a surrender, an admission that the independent family farm might be dying. "We'll keep what we've got," he says firmly. "I'll ride to town tomorrow, talk to the bank manager." Everyone knows it won't help. The bank manager is just an employee, following orders from the main office in Chicago or New York. The invisible hand of Eastern capital reaches even here, to the remotest homestead on the Kansas prairie. After a quick meal of beans and cornbread, it's back to the fields. The grasshoppers are advancing despite your trenches and fires. By sundown, they've consumed nearly 5 acres of wheat. It could have been worse. A full swarm would have taken everything, but it's still a devastating blow. As darkness falls, you trudge back to the house, muscles screaming from hours of digging and hauling water. There's no rest yet, though. Animals need feeding, eggs need collecting, repairs need making, while there's still enough light to see. Inside, your mother and sisters have been working just as hard, cooking, cleaning, mending clothes, preserving vegetables from the kitchen garden. On a farm, everyone works constantly. Children as young as 4 or 5 have daily chores. By 8 or 9, they're doing the work of adults. Dinner is simple. More beans, some salt pork, cornbread left from midday, fresh vegetables from the garden when available, preserved ones in winter. Meat is rare except after slaughtering time. Most farmers can't afford to eat what they raise. The animals are too valuable, alive for milk or eggs or breeding, or worth more sold at market than consumed at home. Luke Miller stopped by, your mother says as she serves the meal. Said the railroad's hiking shipping rates again, 15% starting next month. Your father's face goes still in that way that means he's suppressing rage. The railroads are the bane of every farmer's existence, charging whatever they want because they hold a monopoly on getting crops to market. What choice do you have? Let the wheat rot in your barn? That's the third increase this year, he says finally. They're trying to starve us out. The Grange meeting's on Saturday, you remind him. Wilson said they're talking about building cooperative grain elevators, cut out the railroad's storage fees at least. The Grange, officially known as the patrons of husbandry, has become a lifeline for desperate farm families. Started as a social organisation, it's evolved into a powerful force for agricultural cooperation and political advocacy. Through the Grange, farmers pool resources to buy equipment, establish cooperative storage facilities, and push for regulation of the railroads and banks that exploit them. Your father nods, but his expression remains grim. Cooperatives won't matter if the banks take all our land. Richardson lost his place yesterday, second foreclosure on the county this month. The spectre of foreclosure hangs over every farm family during this period. One bad harvest, one drop in prices, one unexpected expense can mean the difference between keeping your land and losing everything. Each year, more small farmers are pushed out, their land absorbed by larger operations backed by Eastern capital. After dinner, there's a brief respite, the only leisure in a farmer's day. Your father reads aloud from last week's newspaper while everyone mends clothes or shucks corn or repairs tools. The news is mostly about events in distant cities, labour unrest in Chicago, society, balls in New York, railroad strikes in Pennsylvania. Says here Vanderbilt's building a new mansion on Fifth Avenue, your father reads, voice tight with controlled anger. Costs $6 million, has 70 rooms and a heated indoor swimming pool. What's a swimming pool? Asks your youngest brother. Like a private lake, just for bathing in, your mother explains, for people with more money than sense. $6 million. You try to grasp the number, but can't. Your entire farm, the land, the house, the animals, every possession your family owns might be worth $2,000 on a good day. The Vanderbilt mansion costs 3,000 times that amount. This is the grotesque inequality of the Gilded Age. A handful of industrial barons and financial tycoons amassing unprecedented fortunes while millions of farmers and workers struggle for basic survival. The wealth gap has never been wider, the contrast never more stark. Your father continues reading. More bank failures in the East, rumours of another economic panic brewing. The fragility of the entire financial system affects farmers acutely. When urban banks collapse, rural credit dries up. When factories close, demand for agricultural products falls. The fate of your isolated farmstead is tied to economic forces operating thousands of miles away, controlled by men who wouldn't recognise a wheat field if they fell face first into one. Bedtime comes early on the farm, usually by 8 or 9, since everyone will be up again before dawn. You climb to the sleeping loft you share with your siblings, too exhausted to do more than kick off your boots before collapsing onto the corn-husk mattress. Through the small window you can see stars scattered across the prairie sky. It's one advantage farm life has over tenements. Clean air, open space, a beautiful natural world that occasionally makes the hardship seem worthwhile. But lately, even the landscape has turned hostile. 3 years of drought have browned the once lush prairie grasses. The creek that runs through your property has dried to a series of stagnant pools. Last winter brought blizzards that killed half your cattle. This summer, relentless heat has stunted the corn and encouraged insect plagues. Some neighbours have already given up, loading their possessions into wagons and heading back east or pushing further west in search of better conditions. Those who remain speak in hushed voices about bank foreclosures, about families forced to auction everything they own, about proud farmers reduced to becoming tenant labourers on land they once owned. You drift towards sleep with these grim thoughts swirling in your mind. Tomorrow will bring more of the same. Endless labour, financial worry, battles against natural forces beyond your control. Yet something keeps farm families going. Some stubborn belief that next year will be better, that eventually their work will be rewarded with security, if not prosperity. Dawn comes too soon, the first light barely visible when your father's voice calls everyone to wake. Another day of fighting grasshoppers, another day of calculating how to make dwindling resources last until harvest, another day of physical labour that leaves no part of your body unscathed. After a breakfast of cornmeal mush, you head out to the fields again. The grasshoppers have moved on to a new section of wheat. More trenches must be dug, more fires lit. Your younger brothers are tasked with banging pots and pans to create noise that sometimes disperses the insects. Your sisters drag sheets through the field, knocking grasshoppers into buckets of kerosene. Mid-morning, your father leaves for town to speak with the bank manager. It's a 10-mile ride each way, meaning he'll lose a full day of field work. The sacrifice only emphasises the seriousness of your financial situation. While he's gone, you take over directing the grasshopper defence. The sun beats down mercilessly, the temperature climbing past 100 degrees before noon. Your shirt is soaked with sweat, your throat parched despite frequent drinks from the water jug. By midday, everyone's movements have slowed, the heat sapping strength and will. "Look," says your 12-year-old brother suddenly, pointing westward. "Storm coming." A dark line has appeared on the horizon, a bank of clouds moving rapidly toward the farm. In the arid plains, storms can form with frightening speed, turning from clear skies to biblical deluge in minutes. This one looks particularly ominous, the clouds tinged green, a sign of possible hail. "Get to the house," you order, already gathering tools. "Tell Ma we've got weather coming." Everyone moves with practiced urgency. Livestock needs to be secured, windows shuttered, anything loose tied down or brought inside. A bad storm can destroy as much as any grasshopper swarm, flattening crops, killing animals, damaging buildings, even injuring people caught outdoors. By the time you reach the farmyard, the wind has picked up dramatically, carrying dust and debris. The chickens sense the approaching storm and scatter, making your sister's job of herding them into the coop twice as difficult. Your mother appears on the porch, already battening down shutters with methodical efficiency. "Get the horse," she calls to you. "Your father's still out there." The thought of being caught on the open prairie during a severe storm chills your blood. You race to the barn, saddle the spare horse, and are about to ride out when your mother stops you. "Take the cellar rope," she says, handing you a coiled length. "Tie it to your waist. If the visibility goes, you follow it back." The technique has saved many lives during prairie blizzards when swirling snow makes it impossible to see more than a few feet. You loop the rope around your waist, tie the other end to the porch post, and kick the horse into a gallop toward town. The storm catches you about 3 miles out. One moment you're riding under threatening skies, the next you're in the midst of howling wind and stinging dust. The visibility drops to near zero as topsoil, loosened by years of drought and ploughing, lifts into the air in choking clouds. You pull your bandana over your nose and mouth, but it does little good. Dust infiltrates everything. Your clothes, your hair, your lungs. Each breath feels like inhaling sandpaper. The horse balks, confused and frightened by the sudden darkness and noise. Through gaps in the dust cloud, you catch glimpses of the road, enough to keep moving forward. The thought of your father out here somewhere, possibly disoriented or injured, drives you onward despite the danger. About 5 miles from home, you spot a figure stumbling along the roadside. Not your father, but 10-year-old Billy Cooper from a neighbouring farm. His clothes are torn, his face streaked with dirt and blood from numerous small cuts. "Twister!" he screams when he sees you, voice barely audible above the wind. "Hit our place, Mars, trapped!" You haul him onto the horse behind you without hesitation. The Cooper farm is only half a mile off the main road, and whatever has happened there is clearly dire. Your father will have to wait. The scene at the Cooper place stops your heart. Where a humble farmhouse once stood, there's now only splintered wood and scattered belongings. A tornado has touched down, cutting a path of destruction through the property before lifting back into the clouds. The barn is gone entirely. A wagon lies upside down 50 yards from where it was parked. Chickens and ducks wander aimlessly, somehow spared while heavier structures were destroyed. Billy slides off the horse and runs toward the wreckage, pointing frantically. There under the roof, you see it then, a section of the house roof lying flat on the ground, and beneath it, movement. Sarah Cooper, Billy's mother, is pinned under the heavy timbers, only her arm visible as she waves weakly for help. Together, you and Billy struggle to lift the roof section. It's impossibly heavy, designed to withstand prairie winds and winter snow loads. You strain until your muscles scream, gaining perhaps an inch of clearance. "Lever!" you gasp, looking around desperately for something to use. Your eye falls on a broken wagon tongue, about 6 feet long and sturdy enough to serve the purpose. "Get that," you tell Billy, pointing. Using the wagon tongue as a lever and a chunk of firewood as a fulcrum, you manage to lift the roof section just enough for Billy to pull his mother free. She's badly injured, right leg crushed, ribs probably broken, face lacerated from flying debris, but she's alive. "Emmett!" she wheezes, clutching your arm. "My husband! He was in the barn!" The implications hit you like a physical blow. The barn is completely gone, its contents scattered across acres of prairie. If Mr. Cooper was inside when the tornado hit, his chances of survival are virtually nil. Sure enough, a grim search finds Emmett Cooper's body nearly 200 yards from where the barn stood, broken and lifeless amid the twisted wreckage of his farm equipment. Billy's anguished cries cut through even the howling wind as he collapses beside his father's remains. This is another reality of farm life in the Gilded Age, the constant proximity to sudden death, without hospitals, without telephones to call for help, without neighbours close enough to offer immediate assistance. Any accident or natural disaster can quickly become fatal. The independence that draws people to farming comes with profound isolation when tragedy strikes. You help Billy fashion a travois to transport his injured mother. The nearest doctor is in town, 8 miles away. With the storm still raging and Mrs. Cooper's injuries severe, it's a journey that might kill her, but staying means certain death. "I'll find my father," you promise Billy as you secure his mother to the makeshift stretcher. "He'll bring the wagon, get her to the road and wait there." Back on your horse, you continue toward town, following the road by instinct more than sight as the dust storm intensifies. The rope around your waist is your lifeline, the only guarantee you can find your way home if conditions worsen. Luck is with you. About 2 miles further, you encounter your father already returning from town, his wagon providing some protection from the storm. His face, when you explain what's happened at the Cooper place, goes ashen beneath its coating of dust. "Take the wagon," he orders, already climbing down. "I'll ride back. Get them to Doc Miller fast as you can." You pass Billy and his mother on the road minutes later, loading them carefully into the wagon bed. Mrs. Cooper has lost consciousness, her breathing shallow and laboured. The race to town becomes a desperate gamble, balancing the need for speed against the risk of jolting her already severe injuries. The dust storm begins to abate as you near town, the green-tinged clouds moving eastward across the prairie. By the time you reach the doctor's house on the outskirts of Marshall, the air is clearing, though the aftermath of the storm, drifts of dust against buildings, uprooted trees, damaged roofs, is evident everywhere. Doc Miller takes one look at Mrs. Cooper, and his expression tells you everything. He'll do what he can, but with injuries this severe, in an era before antibiotics or modern surgical techniques, her chances are slim. As for Billy, he's just become half-orphaned, with the prospect of full orphanhood looming. At 10 years old, he faces either the county poor farm or being farmed out to relatives who may or may not want another mouth to feed. As you leave them in the doctor's care and begin the long journey home, the full weight of the day's events settles on your shoulders. The Cooper family's tragedy could just as easily have been yours. Every farm family lives on the edge of disaster, financial, natural, personal. There are no safety nets, no insurance policies, no government assistance programs. When calamity strikes, you endure it alone or you don't endure at all. The sun is setting by the time you return to your farm, casting long shadows across fields, partly ravaged by grasshoppers, partly flattened by wind. Your father has rounded up the livestock and secured what he could, but there's clearly significant damage to crops and outbuildings. Inside the house, your mother has a hot meal waiting, a luxury made possible only by your sister's heroic efforts to keep the kitchen fire going through the storm. Everyone eats in near silence, exhausted beyond words by the day's labour and terror. After dinner, your father unfolds the letter from the bank, reading it again by lamplight. Whatever he discussed with the manager clearly brought no relief. The payment is still due, grasshoppers or no grasshoppers, tornado or no tornado. The impersonal machinery of Eastern finance grinds on, indifferent to the realities of farm life. "We'll manage," he says finally, folding the letter away. "We always do." It's the farmer's eternal mantra, equal parts determination, desperation, and self-deception. You'll manage because you must, because the alternative is unthinkable. But as you climb once more to the sleeping loft, body aching and mind troubled, you wonder how long managing can continue against such overwhelming odds. This is the reality of rural America in the Gilded Age, a population increasingly squeezed between natural disasters and economic exploitation, watching their independence erode year by year as land passes from family ownership to corporate control. The yeoman farmer, once the backbone of American democracy, is becoming an endangered species. Yet even as you drift towards sleep, there's a resilience that persists. Tomorrow you'll rise before dawn and face whatever new challenges emerge. You'll work until your hands bleed and your back screams. You'll calculate and recalculate how to make dwindling resources stretch further, because that's what farmers do. They endure, they persist, they hope. And sometimes, just sometimes, that hope is justified. The rain that follows the dust storm brings temporary relief to parched fields. The grasshoppers move on before consuming the entire crop. The bank, faced with too many foreclosures already, might extend the loan terms rather than take another failing property onto its books. Small victories in an ongoing war against forces that seem impossible to defeat, but enough, perhaps, to fight another day. As you sink deeper into your comfortable modern mattress, consider how many family farms were lost during this period, how dramatically American agriculture transformed from an occupation of independent smallholders to an industry dominated by large commercial operations. The struggles of these farm families helped spark political movements that would eventually lead to rural electrification, farm subsidies, and regulations on the banks and railroads that exploited them, but not before countless families lost everything they had worked generations to build. Let's return to the industrial heart of America, where something remarkable was beginning to take shape amid the suffering. From the desperation of factories and tenements, a movement was rising, workers coming together to demand change in ways that would reshape the nation. You wake in darkness, same as always. The tenement room is quiet, except for the soft breathing of your siblings and parents. But today is different. There's a nervous energy in your chest that wasn't there yesterday. Tonight is the meeting. Your father has been whispering about it for weeks. Secret gatherings in basements and back rooms where workers talk about things that could get them fired. Or worse, words like union and strike spoken in hushed tones. Names like Knights of Labour and American Federation of Labour passed from person to person like contraband. "You're old enough," your father had said last night, his voice barely audible over the ambient noise of the tenement. "Time you understood what we're fighting for. At 13, you're considered practically an adult in working-class families. You've been contributing to the household income for years already. Why shouldn't you join the struggle to improve conditions?" The mill whistle sounds its daily scream, calling workers to their stations. Your father rises without a word, dresses quickly in the half-light. Your mother hands him a small package, bread and cheese for midday. They exchange a look that contains an entire conversation. She knows where he's going tonight. She fears for him, but she won't try to stop him. The day passes like any other at the textile mill. Hot, dusty, dangerous. You crawl beneath looms, fixing tangles and broken threads. Your back aches from stooping. Your lungs burn from cotton fibres. But there's something different in the air today. A current running beneath the usual routine. Workers exchange glances. Whispered conversations stop when managers approach. Something is building. When the final whistle blows, you don't head home immediately. Instead, you follow your father at a distance, as instructed. "Don't walk with me," he'd warned. "Form and watch who leaves together. They know who the troublemakers are." He leads you through a maze of narrow streets, doubling back occasionally to ensure you're not followed. The factory owners employ spies, Pinkerton detectives who infiltrate worker groups and report on organisers. Being identified as a union sympathiser means instant dismissal at best, violence at worst. Finally, he turns down an alley behind a German beer hall, descending a narrow staircase to a basement door. He knocks, 3 quick taps, pause, 2 more. A peephole slides open, then the door. "This is my boy," your father says to the man guarding the entrance. "He's with me." The man nods, steps aside. He's welcome, long as he understands the rules. What's said here stays here. You nod solemnly, understanding the weight of this trust. Inside, the basement is dimly lit by a few candles and oil lamps. The air is thick with pipe smoke and the smell of damp stone. About 30 men and a handful of women sit on crates and barrels arranged in rough rows. At the front of the room, a single candle illuminates a makeshift podium. A wooden crate turned upright. You recognise faces in the crowd, men from your father's ironworks, women from the garment factories, a few workers from your own textile mill, people who, hours ago, were covered in sweat and grime, bent under the weight of their labour. Here they sit straight-backed, eyes alert, with something you rarely see in the factories: hope. A man steps up to the crate podium. Michael Halloran, Irish immigrant, 10 years in America. He works the blast furnace at Baldwin Ironworks and has scars up and down his arms from molten metal burns. He's also one of the most well-spoken people you've ever heard, self-educated through the penny papers and public libraries. Brothers and sisters, he begins without preamble. We lost Matthews and Donegal today. Company men saw them talking to workers at Phoenix Mill, fired on the spot. A murmur runs through the crowd. 2 more organisers gone. 2 more families who'll be scrambling to pay rent next week. But, Halloran continues, raising a hand, they signed 20 new members before they were caught. The movement grows, even as they try to stamp it out. Nods all around. A quiet triumph. Now, to business. The committee met with representatives from 3 more factories yesterday. We're approaching 500 committed members in this district alone. Pittsburgh reports over 1,000. Chicago, nearly 2,000. He pauses, letting the numbers sink in. For the first time, friends, we have the beginnings of real power. Not just 100 desperate souls in one factory, but thousands of workers across entire industries saying with one voice, enough. What about the Pinkertons? Calls a voice from the back. Harrison's bringing in 50 more next week. Armed to the teeth, I heard. Halloran's face darkens. The Pinkerton Detective Agency serves as a private army for factory owners, breaking strikes, infiltrating unions, sometimes provoking violence that gives police an excuse to arrest organisers. They're ruthless, well-paid, and enjoy virtual immunity from local laws. We stay peaceful, Halloran says firmly. That's how they want it. Give them an excuse for violence. Our power isn't in our fists. It's in our numbers and our solidarity. Easy to say when it ain't your head getting cracked open, mutters someone nearby. Your father leans toward you, whispering. 3 years ago, they shot 14 strikers at the Pullman factory, women and children among them, called it restoring order. This is the reality of labour organising in the Gilded Age, a dangerous game where the odds are stacked against workers. Factory owners have the police, the courts, the newspapers and private armies on their side. Workers have only their numbers and the economic pressure they can create by withholding labour. The vote, Halloran announces, bringing the meeting back to order. We've discussed it for weeks. The time has come to decide, do we strike on Monday or continue building our numbers? A tense silence falls over the basement. Striking means risking everything. Jobs, homes, physical safety. Some won't survive the hardship that follows, yet continuing under current conditions means watching more workers die from exhaustion, accidents, and preventable disease. My daughter lost 3 fingers last month, says a woman near the front, rising to her feet. Rebecca Wenzel, German immigrant, seamstress at one of the sweatshops on Delancey Street. 14 years old. Sewing machine took them clean off. Boss docked her pay for bleeding on the fabric, then fired her when she couldn't work fast enough with her left hand. She looks around the room, eyes hard with determination. I say we strike, not next month, not when it's convenient, now, before another child is maimed, before another father drops dead from exhaustion. A murmur of agreement ripples through the crowd. My boy died in the mines, adds an older man with a heavy Welsh accent. 11 years old, crushed when a support beam gave way. Company man said it was his own fault for not seeing the danger. Offered me $1 for burial expenses and told me to be grateful. More voices join in. Stories of exploitation, injury, death. The temperature in the room rises with each account. These aren't abstract principles being debated. They're lived experiences, wounds still raw and bleeding. Halloran lets it continue for several minutes, then raises his hands for quiet. This is why we're here. This is what we're fighting to change. But a strike that fails will leave us worse off than before. We must be certain we have enough support to sustain it. "The Irish are with you," calls a voice. "All 300 at National Steel." "Italians too," adds another. "We've signed nearly everyone at the glassworks." "The women's garment shops are ready," says Rebecca Wenzel. "Even the home workers have pledged to stop production." One by one, representatives from different factories and ethnic groups report their numbers. It's a remarkable feat of organisation in an era before telephones or easy transportation, before workers had any legal protections for such activities. Through whispered conversations on factory floors, messages passed hand to hand, meetings in church basements and beer halls, they've built a movement comprising thousands. Your father rises, speaking for the ironworkers. 240 men, everyone committed. We've been stockpiling food for 2 months. We can hold out 3 weeks, maybe 4. This is another aspect of strike preparation, building reserves to survive without wages. Working-class families live so close to the edge that even a week without income can mean eviction or starvation. To sustain a strike, they must plan like armies preparing for siege. "What about the coloured workers?" someone asks. "Will they stand with us or scab?" The question highlights one of the labour movement's greatest challenges. Racial divisions, deliberately stoked by employers, frequently undermine solidarity. Factory owners exploit these tensions, using black workers as strike breakers, then discarding them when the strike ends. "I've spoken with their representatives," Halloran answers carefully. "They have legitimate concerns. White unions haven't exactly welcomed them in the past. This is putting it mildly. Many unions explicitly exclude black workers, forcing them to accept whatever terms employers offer. When they do strike independently, they receive little support from white labour organisations." But, Halloran continues, "they understand this fight is for all workers. They've agreed not to take our jobs if we promise to include them in negotiations and any benefits won." Murmurs of approval mix with scattered grumbling. Progress is halting, imperfect, but real. The vote, when it comes, is overwhelming. Strike on Monday. Every person raises their hand, though fear is visible on many faces. They know what they're risking. They know some who vote tonight may not survive to see the outcome. As the meeting breaks up, people leave in 2s and 3s, staggering their departures to avoid attracting attention. Plans are made for picket lines, soup kitchens, strike funds. The machinery of resistance, built painstakingly over months, begins to move. Outside, the night air feels electric. Your father walks beside you now, no longer concerned about being seen together. That secrecy belongs to the time before decision, before commitment. Now they've chosen their path. "Are you scared?" you ask him, voicing the question that's been building inside you all evening. He considers this seriously, not dismissing it as childish. "Yes," he says finally, "any sane person would be. We're challenging men who think nothing of breaking bodies to protect profits." You walk a few more steps in silence before he adds, "But I'm more scared of not fighting, of watching you and your brothers grow up into the same broken system, working yourselves to death for men who see you as machines, not humans." This is the calculation made by thousands of workers in the Gilded Age, weighing immediate dangers against long-term costs of inaction. For many, the choice to organise came only after witnessing one tragedy too many. A child mangled in machinery, a friend worked to death, a neighbour's family evicted in winter. The weekend passes in tense preparation. Your mother packs away the family's few valuables: photographs, your grandmother's Bible, the good set of dishes used only at Christmas. If the strike turns violent, if evictions begin, these treasures will be the first casualties. Your father meets constantly with other organisers, planning picket locations, communication systems, support for families most vulnerable to hardship. There's talk of violence, not from the workers, but from the company's inevitable response. Strategies for defence are discussed, then discarded. We can't win that fight, Halloran insists. Our power is in solidarity, not force. Monday dawns clear and cold, a November morning with frost-etching windows and breath visible in the air. Instead of heading to the mills and factories, workers gather at predetermined locations throughout the industrial district. By 7 o'clock, nearly 2,000 men, women, and even children form picket lines outside major workplaces. They carry hastily made signs: 8-hour day, fair wages for fair work, no child labour, safety now. Simple demands that seem radical only because conditions are so brutal. They sing union songs, their voices rising in the morning air, a sound of defiance and hope. You stand with your father outside the ironworks gates, watching as a few strikebreakers, mostly desperate newcomers unaware of the strike, are turned away by the picket line. No violence, just firm solidarity. There's work for you when we win, the strikers tell them. But cross this line today, and you hurt us all. By mid-morning, production has ground to a near halt across the district. Only a skeleton crew of managers and reluctant strikebreakers remain inside most facilities. It's a stunning display of worker power, unprecedented in scale for this city. The response comes swiftly. Police arrive first, ostensibly to maintain order, though no disorder exists. They position themselves between picketers and factory gates, faces impassive beneath blue caps. Behind them, Pinkerton agents in plain clothes take up stations, many openly carrying clubs or pistols. Around noon, tensions escalate when a caravan of wagons approaches the textile mill, carrying replacement workers, mostly immigrants fresh off the boats, desperate for any employment, unaware they're being used as pawns in a labour dispute. The picket line holds firm, workers locking arms to prevent the wagons from reaching the gates. Police move in with clubs drawn. From somewhere in the crowd, a bottle flies, shattering at an officer's feet. It's the spark needed to justify what follows. Police charge the line, clubs swinging indiscriminately. Pinkerton men join the assault, targeting known organisers with particular brutality. Within minutes, the peaceful picket devolves into chaos, workers fleeing, some fighting back, blood staining the frozen ground. Your father pushes you behind him as the violence spreads toward your position. Run, he orders, voice tight with urgency. Get to St. Mary's Church. Tell Reverend Collins what's happening. He'll open the basement for wounded. You hesitate, terrified of leaving him amidst the growing melee. Go, he insists, more forcefully. Now! As you turn to run, you see a Pinkerton agent pointing directly at your father, identifying him to others as a union leader. 3 men converge on his position, clubs raised. The last glimpse you have before rounding the corner is your father standing his ground, fists raised in a futile gesture of defence against overwhelming force. The church is 6 blocks away. You run the entire distance, lungs burning in the cold air, the sounds of conflict fading behind you. Reverend Collins, one of the few clergy openly sympathetic to Labour, is already organising a makeshift hospital in the parish hall, having anticipated this outcome. They're attacking the picket lines, you gasp, finding him directing volunteers. My father, they were coming for him when I left. The Reverend's face tightens, but he shows no surprise. "They always do," he says grimly. "Target the leaders first, break morale, end the strike before it gains momentum. Tale as old as organised labour." He places a hand on your shoulder. "We'll find him, son. For now, make yourself useful. We'll need water boiled and bandages torn from those sheets." The next hours pass in a blur of activity and dread. Wounded strikers begin arriving. First a trickle, then a flood. Men with broken bones and split scalps, women with bruised faces and torn clothing, even children caught in the fray, their small bodies bearing marks of indiscriminate violence. You search each new arrival for your father, relief mingling with renewed anxiety as face after unfamiliar face comes through the door. By evening, over 60 injured strikers fill the parish hall, lying on pews and makeshift pallets. The air smells of blood and antiseptic. Moans of pain mix with whispered prayers and occasional defiant declarations that the fight goes on. Just after sunset, they bring him in, 2 men supporting his weight between them. His face is barely recognisable beneath caked blood and swelling. One eye is completely closed. He walks with a pronounced limp, ribs visibly damaged beneath his torn shirt, but he's alive. You rush to him, helping guide him to an empty space along the wall. A volunteer nurse, herself the wife of a striking steel worker, brings water and clean cloths. Together, you begin the process of cleaning his wounds, assessing the damage. "You should see the other fellow," your father jokes weakly, wincing as you dab at a deep cut above his eye. "Which one?" you ask, fighting to keep your voice steady. "Looked like 3 were coming at you." 4, actually. A ghost of a smile crosses his battered face. "Got a couple good hits in before they put me down." This stoic humour in the face of brutality is characteristic of labour activists throughout the period. They meet violence with determined resilience, understanding that physical intimidation is a tactic designed to break their will. By refusing to be broken, they claim a kind of victory, even in defeat. As night falls, Halloran arrives at the church, relatively unscathed compared to many. He moves among the wounded, speaking quietly with each, gauging resolve, offering encouragement. When he reaches your father, he squats down to eye level. "Bad day," he says simply. Your father nods, then grimaces at the pain the movement causes. "Could have been worse." "How many held the line?" "About half. Rest scattered when the cops came in swinging. You can't blame them." Halloran's eyes scan the room, taking in the dozens of injured. "They hit us hard, but they didn't break us. Tomorrow, we go again." The determination is staggering. These men and women, many barely able to stand, are preparing to face the same violence tomorrow, not because they don't understand the danger, but because they believe so deeply in the necessity of their struggle. Late that night, after your father has fallen into an exhausted sleep propped against the church wall, Rebecca Wenzel finds you bringing fresh water to the wounded. "Your papa's a brave man," she says, helping you distribute cups. "I saw him stand against those Pinkertons, gave others time to get away." "Will it make any difference?" you ask, the question that's been building inside you all day. All this pain, all this risk, will anything change? She considers the question seriously, looking around at the injured strikers, many now sleeping fitfully on their makeshift beds. "Not all at once," she admits. "Not in one strike, one city, 1 year. But yes, things will change, because they must." She points to a young girl sleeping nearby, arm wrapped in bandages, where a police club caught her. "That's my Liesel, 14 years old, already 4 years working in the garment shops. I fight so maybe she can have something better. Maybe her children won't start work at 10. Maybe they'll have schools instead of factories, books instead of machines." This perspective, the long view that sees beyond immediate victories or defeats, sustains many labour activists through repeated setbacks. They measure progress not in days or weeks, but in generations, planting seeds of change they may never live to see bloom. The strike continues for 17 days. Each morning, picket lines form, smaller than before but still determined. Each day brings more violence, more arrests, more injuries. Families are evicted from company housing. Relief funds stretch thin, then break. Hunger becomes a constant companion in striking households. Gradually, inevitably, workers begin returning to their jobs, not because their resolve weakens, but because survival demands it. A parent can stand on principle while starving themselves. They cannot watch their children go hungry. By the end of the third week, the strike is effectively broken. The mills and factories operate at near normal capacity. Union leaders, those not hospitalised or jailed, meet in the same basement where the vote was taken, facing the bitter task of acknowledging defeat. "We lost this round," Halloran tells the diminished gathering, his voice hoarse from shouting over police whistles for weeks. "But we're not finished. We learned valuable lessons. Next time we'll be better prepared, better organised." "Next time," someone calls out bitterly, "half our members can't feed their families. Some won't ever work again with their injuries. And for what? Nothing's changed." Halloran doesn't offer false comfort or easy platitudes. "For now," he acknowledges, "but remember what we accomplished. 2,000 workers standing together across different factories, different trades, different backgrounds. That hasn't happened before, not here. The bosses had to bring in an army to break us. They're scared, and they should be." It's cold comfort to those who sacrificed everything, but it contains a kernel of truth that history would validate. This strike, like hundreds of others across America during the Gilded Age, ended in apparent defeat. Yet each one built knowledge, solidarity, and determination that would eventually lead to significant changes in labour conditions. The 8-hour workday, the end of child labour, workplace safety regulations, minimum wage laws, all these now standard protections grew from the blood and sacrifice of workers who lost most of their immediate battles but ultimately helped win the larger war for basic dignity. Your father returns to the ironworks the following Monday, body still bearing the marks of Pinkerton clubs. The foreman eyes his injuries with barely concealed satisfaction but says nothing. He's one of the lucky ones, rehired despite his union activities because his skills are difficult to replace. Many others find themselves blacklisted, unable to find work in their trade anywhere in the region. Life resumes its grueling routine, 12-hour days, dangerous conditions, barely subsistence wages. On the surface, nothing has changed. Yet beneath this apparent return to normal, something has shifted. Workers who stood together on picket lines now share a bond, forged in collective struggle. Conversations continue in hushed tones during lunch breaks. Meetings still happen, less frequently but with growing strategic sophistication. The seeds of the next movement are already being planted. As you drift towards sleep in your comfortable modern bed, consider how many of the workplace protections we now take for granted were purchased with the blood and sacrifice of workers who never lived to see their efforts bear fruit. The labour movements of the Gilded Age, despite repeated defeats, laid groundwork for reforms that would eventually transform American working conditions. A reminder that progress often comes not in dramatic victories, but through persistent struggle against seemingly insurmountable odds. While men fought on picket lines and farms battled both nature and banks, another powerful force was reshaping American society during the Gilded Age. Women across social classes were carving out new roles, challenging boundaries, and building movements that would transform the nation in ways perhaps more lasting than any strike or political campaign. Let's shift our perspective once more, this time to the complex and varied experiences of women navigating this tumultuous era. Dawn arrives with a familiarity that borders on cruelty. Sarah Murray has been awake for an hour already, stoking the coal stove in her tiny tenement apartment, preparing for another 16-hour day. At 32, she looks 50, her body worn down by a decade of working as a laundress since her husband died in a factory accident. The work has taken its toll, her hands permanently red and cracked from lye soap, her back curved from bending over washboards and mangles, her lungs damaged from breathing steam and chemical fumes day after day. But she doesn't complain. The $3 a week she earns keeps her 3 children fed, if not well fed. "Ma, my throat hurts again," whispers 8-year-old Molly, the youngest, appearing in the doorway wrapped in a thin blanket. Sarah places a gentle hand on her daughter's forehead. The skin burns with fever, the same fever that comes and goes, never quite resolving. Tuberculosis, probably, the white plague that stalks the tenements, claiming victims of all ages, but especially children. "I know, love," Sarah says, trying to keep the worry from her voice. "Drink this tea and then rest today. No school." No school is no great hardship. Molly only attends sporadically anyway, when there's no piecework for her to do at home. Like many tenement children, her education takes a distant second place to survival needs. The older children are already up and dressed. Michael, 12, prepares for his day at the glassworks, while Kate, 14, gathers the pile of sewing she'll deliver to the garment shop before starting her shift there. "Remember, straight home after work," Sarah reminds them. "No stopping anywhere." The warnings are unnecessary but habitual. In these neighbourhoods, danger lurks everywhere for unaccompanied children, especially girls. Sarah's day unfolds like hundreds before it, collecting dirty laundry from wealthier homes uptown, hauling the heavy loads back to her tenement, scrubbing for hours in water that scalds in winter and breeds mosquitoes in summer, then returning the clean items for a few pennies payment. The contrast between the homes she services and her own living conditions couldn't be more stark. While she and her 3 children share a single room with no running water and a toilet shared by 20 families, her employers live in spacious brownstones with servants' quarters, indoor plumbing and electric lights. "Just leave those in the utility room, Mrs. Murray," instructs the housekeeper at the Astor home, not looking up from her ledger, "and please use the service entrance next time. Madam doesn't like seeing, well, you understand." Sarah understands perfectly. Her worn clothes, red hands, and obvious exhaustion mark her as part of the invisible class that keeps society functioning, seen when needed, ignored otherwise. The wealthy women whose silk undergarments and fine linens she washes would scarcely recognize her if they passed on the street. Across town, in a very different setting, another woman prepares for her day. Elizabeth Blackwell, 38, adjusts her hat in the mirror of her modest but comfortable home. As one of the first female physicians in America, she's fought battles most women can scarcely imagine. Gaining admission to medical school, enduring harassment from male students and professors, building a practice in a profession openly hostile to her gender. Today, she's visiting the tenements, documenting health conditions for a report she's preparing on urban sanitation. The male-dominated health board dismisses her findings regularly, but she persists, gathering irrefutable evidence of how poor living conditions spread disease. They can ignore one woman, she often says. They cannot ignore facts forever. The tenement she visits could be Sarah Murray's building. Dark hallways, thick with the smell of boiled cabbage and sewage, overcrowded apartments where entire families live, work, eat and sleep in single rooms, children with the hollow-eyed look of chronic malnutrition. In one apartment, she finds a mother giving birth on a mattress shared with 3 other children. The woman has no doctor, no midwife, just an elderly neighbour who's seen enough births to offer basic help. How far apart are the pains? Elizabeth asks, immediately setting down her bag and rolling up her sleeves. Who are you? The neighbour asks suspiciously. A doctor, Elizabeth replies, already examining the labouring woman. The neighbour snorts. Women ain't doctors. This one is, Elizabeth says simply, pulling out clean cloths and instruments. And a good thing too, because this baby is coming breech. In the next hour, Elizabeth guides a healthy baby boy into the world, saving both mother and child from what would likely have been fatal complications without skilled intervention. She leaves medicine, clean bandages, and what money she can spare, knowing it's a temporary solution at best. What these women need isn't charity, but systemic change. Better housing, clean water, living wages, control over their reproductive lives. As she walks back to her office, Elizabeth contemplates how to convey this urgency to the men who control city government. Men who rarely set foot in the neighbourhoods where their decisions mean life or death. Now let's turn our attention to yet another woman navigating the Gilded Age landscape. Jane Addams stands in the centre of Hull House, the settlement home she founded in one of Chicago's poorest immigrant neighbourhoods. At 31, she represents a new generation of educated, unmarried women putting their considerable talents to use in social reform rather than domesticity. Miss Addams, come quick, calls a young Italian girl tugging at her skirt. Papa's coughing blood again. Jane follows immediately. Though not a doctor like Elizabeth Blackwell, she's become a de facto medical provider, social worker, legal advocate, and general problem solver for the community Hull House serves. Today alone, she's already intervened in a domestic violence situation, taught English to recently arrived Polish immigrants, and negotiated with a landlord threatening eviction. The settlement house movement represents one of the most significant contributions of women to social reform during this period. Unable to vote or hold political office, women like Jane Addams created parallel institutions that addressed immediate needs while gathering data for advocacy. Hull House isn't just a charity, it's a laboratory for developing solutions to urban poverty. We need a health clinic, Jane tells her fellow settlement worker Ellen Gates Starr after returning from the sick man's home. Not just emergency care, but preventative medicine, education about sanitation, regular checkups for children. The city council will never fund it, Ellen replies, practical as always. Then we'll find private donors, Jane says, already mentally composing letters to wealthy women who might be persuaded to support such an endeavour. Mrs. Rockefeller was quite impressed with our kindergarten programme. Perhaps she'll see the value in healthy children as well as educated ones. This is another key aspect of women's reform work during the Gilded Age, their ability to leverage social connections across class lines. Women like Addams, often from privileged backgrounds themselves, built bridges between wealthy philanthropists and impoverished communities, creating channels for resources that circumvented the male-dominated political system. Meanwhile, in a spacious brownstone on New York's Upper East Side, Caroline Astor prepares for her weekly salon. As the self-appointed gatekeeper of high society, she wields enormous power in determining who belongs to the elite 400, her calculation of how many people matter in New York society. Mrs. Astor, begins her secretary tentatively, Miss Anthony has requested an audience again regarding the suffrage matter. Caroline waves a dismissive hand. Tell her I'm engaged this season, perhaps next year. Susan B. Anthony has been trying for months to gain Caroline's support for women's voting rights. With one word, Mrs. Astor could make suffrage fashionable among the wealthy women whose husbands control the legislature. But Caroline, like many conservative women of her class, sees voting as unladylike, a vulgar intrusion into the male sphere. She mentioned that Mrs. Vanderbilt has expressed interest in the cause, the secretary adds, knowing this might capture her employer's attention. Indeed, Caroline pauses. The rivalry between the Astors and the Vanderbilts is legendary in New York society. Has she really? Well then, perhaps I should hear what Miss Anthony has to say. Arrange something next week. This small exchange illustrates how women's advancement often hinged on social dynamics invisible to men. The suffrage movement gained critical momentum when it became acceptable, even fashionable, among society women, creating pressure that male politicians couldn't easily ignore. Let's return to Sarah Murray, our laundress, as she finishes her exhausting day. After delivering the last bundle of clean clothes, she stops at a settlement house, similar to Jane Addams' Hull House. Here, working women gather twice monthly to discuss issues affecting their lives and organise for better conditions. Tonight's topic is the sweating system, the practice of farming out piecework to women working at home, paying them starvation wages for garments that will sell for 20 times what they earn making them. My daughter works 14 hours a day on these shirtwaists, Sarah tells the group, holding up a delicate blouse. Gets 3 cents each, makes maybe 15 cents a day if her fingers don't give out, and then we see them in shop windows for $2. Same with these artificial flowers, adds another woman, displaying the meticulously crafted silk blooms used to adorn fashionable hats. Half a penny each, my 6-year-old helps make them after school. His eyes are already going bad from the strain. The meeting is led by Mary Kenny O'Sullivan, one of the first female labour organisers in America. Unlike male-dominated unions that often excluded women, O'Sullivan focuses specifically on industries where women predominate: garment work, food processing, domestic service. We need to consider a strike, she tells the assembled women. Not just one shop or one factory, but all the garment workers together. They can replace 100 women, but not thousands. The room buzzes with nervous energy. For women workers, striking carries even greater risks than for men. Many are single mothers or sole breadwinners. Others face violence at home if they don't contribute their expected share to family income. My husband would kill me, one woman says plainly. Says unions are for men, not women. Mine too, adds another. Says I should be grateful for any work at all. This reveals another challenge women faced, organising not just against employers, but often against the men in their own families who viewed female independence as a threat to traditional authority. What if we start smaller, suggests Sarah. What if we all agree not to accept less than 5 cents per shirtwaist? No strikes yet, just a floor we won't go below. The idea gains traction, a modest first step that might build solidarity without immediately triggering retaliation. Women begin signing a pledge, creating the foundation for what would eventually become the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, one of the most powerful labour organisations in American history. As the meeting concludes, Sarah hurries home through darkening streets. Despite her exhaustion, a small flame of hope burns inside her. For the first time, she feels part of something larger than her daily struggle, a movement of women supporting each other, fighting together for dignity and fair treatment. That hope dims when she arrives at her tenement and finds Molly's fever worse, her breathing laboured in the telltale pattern of advanced tuberculosis. The landlord has shut off water to the building again over a disputed bill, meaning she can't even offer her child clean water to drink. "Mama," whispers Molly through cracked lips. "Tell me about heaven again." Sarah's heart fractures at the question. Children in the tenements become familiar with death early, watching siblings and friends succumb to diseases that barely touch wealthier neighbourhoods. They speak of heaven with the casual certainty of those who expect to see it soon. Across the city, Elizabeth Blackwell sits at her desk late into the night documenting the cases she's seen today. Her medical journal contains not just symptoms and treatments, but detailed observations of living conditions, work environments, and social factors affecting health. Infant mortality in tenement districts reaches 25% before age 1, she writes, compared to 7% in affluent neighbourhoods. Primary causes: contaminated water, poor nutrition, inadequate ventilation, overcrowding, all preventable. Her work represents another dimension of women's contributions during this period, the gathering and systematising of data that male authorities couldn't easily dismiss. Women like Blackwell, often excluded from traditional power structures, became expert documentarians of social conditions, creating irrefutable evidence of problems that comfortable men might otherwise ignore. Meanwhile, at Hull House, Jane Addams hosts a different kind of gathering, a discussion circle where immigrant women share traditional skills and cultural practices. Tonight, an Italian grandmother demonstrates pasta making, while a Polish mother teaches embroidery techniques. The settlement house becomes a space where women's knowledge is valued, where different cultures meet as equals. "In my country," says Mrs. Zabronsky in halting English, "women own the food. From garden to table, it is ours. Here, men control even this." The comment sparks a fascinating discussion about how immigration has shifted gender roles, how American industrial capitalism disrupts traditional family economies where women held significant power over crucial domains like food production and textile making. Jane listens carefully, adding these insights to her growing understanding of how gender, class, and ethnicity intersect in complex ways. Unlike many reformers who approach immigrant communities with paternalistic attitudes, she recognizes that these women possess valuable knowledge and agency of their own. This approach exemplifies another aspect of women's reform work in the Gilded Age, a capacity to build coalitions across differences, to create inclusive movements addressing multiple forms of oppression simultaneously. In her Upper East Side home, Caroline Astor lies awake despite the lateness of the hour. Her conversation with her secretary about the suffrage movement has stirred uncomfortable questions. Her entire identity is built around upholding traditional social hierarchies, yet she can't ignore the changing world around her. Her own daughter has expressed interest in attending college, unthinkable a generation ago, but increasingly common among elite families. Women she respects are joining reform movements, speaking publicly on social issues, even managing substantial philanthropic enterprises without male oversight. Perhaps, she thinks, some aspects of tradition might change without everything collapsing. It's a small shift in thinking, but multiplied across thousands of influential women like her, such reconsiderations would eventually help usher in significant social transformations. As night deepens across the city, these four women, a laundress, a doctor, a settlement house founder, and a society matron, represent different facets of female experience during the Gilded Age. Despite their vastly different circumstances, each in her own way is pushing against the limitations imposed by a male-dominated society, creating openings for future generations. Sarah Murray cradles her feverish daughter, knowing the child will likely not survive to adulthood, but determined to give her whatever comfort is possible in her short life. Her participation in the Garment Workers' Organisation plants seeds that will grow into labour protections benefiting millions. Elizabeth Blackwell compiles her research, building an irrefutable case for public health reforms that will eventually transform urban living conditions. Her pioneering role as a female physician opens doors for countless women in medicine. Jane Addams develops innovative approaches to community development that will influence social work, urban planning, and education for decades to come. Her settlement house model provides a template for addressing poverty that acknowledges the complexity of human needs beyond mere economic factors. And even Caroline Astor, despite her conservatism, inadvertently contributes to women's advancement by demonstrating female capacity for social leadership and organisational power, qualities that suffragists will argue justify women's full citizenship. Together, these women and thousands like them across America are engaged in a quieter revolution than the dramatic strikes and political campaigns dominated by men, but one no less significant in reshaping American society. They are expanding the very definition of womanhood, claiming space in public life and building institutions that address human needs the industrial capitalist system ignores. Their work often goes unrecognised in traditional histories focused on presidents, industrialists and labour leaders, yet their legacy endures in the schools, hospitals, settlement houses and community organisations they created, in the labour protections and public health measures they fought for, and in the expanded opportunities future generations of women would inherit. As you rest in your comfortable bed, consider how many of the social supports and protections we now take for granted, from child labour laws to food safety regulations, from public health departments to social work services, grew from the persistent efforts of women during the Gilded Age, who refused to accept that poverty, exploitation and suffering were inevitable costs of progress. The Gilded Age was an era of stunning contrasts: opulent wealth alongside crushing poverty, rapid technological progress alongside primitive working conditions, soaring rhetoric about American opportunity alongside brutal reality for millions. But within this dark chapter of American history, small points of light began to emerge, the first glimmers of reform that would eventually transform the nation. Let's explore the seeds of change that were planted during this difficult time and follow a few of our characters as they experience the earliest signs of a shifting tide. It's 1897 now, nearly a decade since we first met our tenement family in New York. The morning light filters through a window that's slightly larger than the one in their previous apartment. They've moved, not to a dramatically better situation, but to a marginally improved one. A new law tenement built after the housing reforms of 1879, with slightly better ventilation and the luxury of a private toilet shared by only 2 families instead of 20. You're 17 now, no longer crawling beneath textile looms but operating one, a promotion of sorts, though the work remains grueling and dangerous. Your brother, now 14, has found steady employment at a print shop, a cleaner environment than the glass factory, with marginally better working conditions. Your father still works at the ironworks, his body increasingly bent and broken, but he takes quiet pride in the small improvements secured by sporadic labour actions over the years. Got the notice today, he says, over a dinner that's slightly more substantial than the meals of your childhood. Factories installing safety rails on the high platforms only took 5 men falling to their deaths to make it happen. The bitter humour masks genuine progress. After years of pressure from workers, journalists and reformers, safety regulations are beginning to appear in industries where deaths and maimings were once considered unavoidable business expenses. The changes are maddeningly slow and incomplete, but they represent real victories purchased with workers' blood and persistence. Your mother, whose hands still bear the permanent damage of years of laundry work, has found a position with one of the new settlement houses established by middle-class reformers in the neighbourhood. The pay is minimal, but the work is less physically destructive than scrubbing clothes. And it connects her to a network of women working to improve tenement conditions. The city inspector came through Mulberry Street today, she tells the family, condemned 3 buildings for lack of fire escapes. 10 years ago they wouldn't have bothered. This is another area of incremental progress. After decades of devastating tenement fires killing hundreds of residents yearly, housing reforms are finally gaining traction. Fire escapes, though flimsy and inadequate by modern standards, offer at least some chance of survival when the inevitable flames erupt. Building codes requiring minimum standards for ventilation and sanitation, though weakly enforced, establish the principle that housing conditions are a matter of public concern, not merely private profits. Your youngest sister, the one who battled consumption for years, did not survive to see these modest improvements. Her death at 9 years old remains a raw wound for the family, but your other siblings are healthier than you were at their ages, benefiting from slightly better nutrition, somewhat improved housing, and the growing understanding of disease prevention filtering down even to poor neighbourhoods. After breakfast, you head not to the factory but to a union meeting. It's Sunday, you're one day off, but you gladly sacrifice the time to participate in the movement that has become central to your life. Since witnessing the brutal suppression of the strike years ago, you've become increasingly involved in labour organising, first as a message carrier, then as a committee member, now as a shop steward representing your floor at the textile mill. The meeting takes place not in a secretive basement, but in a proper hall rented for the purpose. Labour organisations, though still facing opposition and occasional violence, have established a more secure foothold in industrial communities. The Knights of Labour have faded, but the American Federation of Labour has grown to over 500,000 members nationwide. More importantly, the idea of workers collectively negotiating with employers has gained legitimacy even among some business leaders tired of constant industrial warfare. Big news from Washington, announces Michael Halloran, the same organiser who led the failed strike years ago, now showing grey in his beard, but undiminished in commitment. President McKinley signed the Erdman Act last week, makes it illegal for railroads to fire workers just for joining a union. A murmur of approval runs through the hall. It's a limited victory. The law applies only to railroad workers and has significant loopholes, but it represents the first federal recognition of workers' right to organise without punishment. After decades of courts consistently siding with employers, even this small legal protection feels momentous. Don't get too excited, Halloran cautions. This doesn't apply to most of us, and God knows the companies will find ways around it, but it's a start, a crack in the wall we've been pushing against for 20 years. The meeting continues with discussion of practical matters, strike funds, organising strategies, negotiations with specific employers. The conversation is more sophisticated than the passionate but sometimes unfocused gatherings of your youth. Experience has taught the labour movement painful but valuable lessons about what works and what doesn't in the struggle for better conditions. After the meeting, you walk home through streets that have seen subtle but significant changes. Public drinking fountains now offer clean water at regular intervals, a small improvement with enormous health implications in neighbourhoods where waterborne diseases once swept through with devastating regularity. Garbage collection, though inadequate, happens with greater frequency than in your childhood, reducing the mountains of rotting waste that once defined tenement districts. Passing a small park that didn't exist 5 years ago, you notice children playing on simple equipment under the watchful eyes of settlement house volunteers. The concept of dedicated play spaces for urban children, championed by reformers like Jacob Rees and Lillian Wald, has begun to take hold in city planning. These modest playgrounds represent recognition that children need more than mere survival. They need development, exercise, and joy. You spot a familiar face among the volunteer supervisors, Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, one of the first female physicians in America and a tireless advocate for public health reforms. Now in her 70s, she still visits tenement neighbourhoods regularly, her decades of documenting disease and deplorable conditions having contributed significantly to the emerging field of public health. "Good afternoon, young man," she greets you, recognizing you from the health committee at the settlement house. "How's your father's cough?" "Better with that medicine you suggested," you reply. "Thanks for asking." This brief exchange highlights another subtle shift, the growing presence of professionals like doctors, nurses, and social workers in previously neglected communities. Their services remain woefully inadequate to the scale of need, but they bring not just immediate help, but knowledge and advocacy that gradually improves conditions for all. Continuing homeward, you pass a schoolhouse where children actually attend with some regularity now. Education for working-class children remains sporadic and often interrupted by economic necessity, but attendance has improved since your childhood. States have begun passing compulsory education laws, and while enforcement is weak, the principle that children belong in classrooms rather than factories has gained ground. Inside one of those classrooms sits your 10-year-old cousin, recently arrived from Ireland. Unlike your generation, who went straight to work at 6 or 7, she's learning to read and write, acquiring skills that might eventually lead to clerical work instead of factory labour. Her future remains precarious, but options exist that were unimaginable a decade earlier. "You should see her school books," your aunt had marvelled recently. Pictures and stories and sums, not like the old country where they barely had slates to write on. These educational improvements stem partly from the kindergarten movement championed by women reformers who established model programs demonstrating that even the poorest children could thrive with appropriate learning environments. Gradually, these innovations filtered into public school systems, though quality varies dramatically by neighbourhood and funding remains inadequate. Near your tenement, you notice a health department notice posted on a water pump, a warning about possible contamination with instructions for purification. This simple paper represents a significant advance, official acknowledgement that the government bears responsibility for preventing disease, not just responding to epidemics after they've claimed thousands of lives. The growing field of public health, driven largely by reform-minded doctors and nurses who meticulously documented connections between living conditions and disease, has begun shifting how cities address sanitation, water quality, and housing standards. Deaths from preventable diseases have decreased, though they remain shockingly common by modern standards. Arriving home, you find a newspaper on the table, a luxury your family couldn't afford in earlier years. Your brother, whose work at the print shop has instilled a love of reading, has brought it home. The headlines announce congressional hearings on child labour, with photographs by Lewis Hine showing children as young as 5 working in mines and factories. "Look at this," your father says, pointing to the article. 10 years ago, nobody would have cared enough to even write about it, let alone have government hearings. The increasing visibility of industrial abuses represents another form of progress. Photographers like Hine and Jacob Rees, journalists like Ida Tarbell and Lincoln Steffens, and authors like Upton Sinclair have begun documenting conditions previously hidden from middle-class awareness. Their work, often called muckraking by critics, makes it harder for comfortable Americans to ignore the human cost of their prosperity. Your mother returns from her afternoon shift at the settlement house, bringing news that ripples through the tenement community. The city has approved funding for a public bathhouse in the neighbourhood. Clean water and soap for anyone who needs it, she announces proudly, having been part of the women's committee that petitioned for years for this basic facility. No more washing in buckets of water hauled up 5 flights of stairs. This modest victory reflects both the persistence of women reformers and the gradually changing attitudes toward public health and sanitation. Clean bodies are increasingly understood not as a luxury, but as a necessity for preventing disease. The provision of basic, hygienic facilities begins to be seen as a public responsibility rather than a private concern. After dinner, the family gathers around as your father reads from a pamphlet distributed by the Union, a simplified explanation of the Sherman Antitrust Act and how it might be used to break up the monopolies that have dominated American industry. The language is complex, but the message offers hope. The unchecked power of industrial combinations might finally face legal constraints. They've already filed suit against the Sugar Trust, he notes. Railroad monopolies could be next, maybe even Old Man Carnegie's steel empire. The reality, of course, is more complicated than the pamphlet suggests. Early antitrust efforts often failed or were co-opted by the very interests they aim to control, but the principle that government should regulate corporate power rather than simply enabling it marks an important shift in American political thought. Later that evening, in the relative privacy afforded by your slightly improved housing, you read a letter from Sarah, a young woman you met through union activities. She's been hired as a clerk at a department store, one of the new employment opportunities gradually opening to women beyond domestic service, factory work, or teaching. 12 hours on my feet, but no machines trying to take my fingers off, she writes, and they can't dock my pay when a loom breaks down. This represents another subtle improvement, the expansion of employment options beyond the most dangerous and exploitative industries. Retail work, clerical positions, and service jobs, while still offering low wages and long hours, provide alternatives to the brutal conditions of factories and mines. Sarah's letter continues with news of her younger sister attending a trade school established by reformers, learning typing and stenography, skills that might lead to office work rather than manual labour. This emerging pathway to slightly better employment, while available to only a fraction of working class women, hints at future possibilities for economic mobility. As you prepare for bed, you reflect on these small but meaningful changes. Life for working people remains incredibly difficult by any modern standard. Long hours, dangerous conditions, minimal security, and limited opportunity still define most workers' experience. But compared to the absolute nadir of the 1880s, modest improvements have accumulated through persistent struggle and advocacy. Your father, joining you on the tenement roof where residents often sleep in summer to escape the indoor heat, summarises this complicated reality. We're still at the bottom, make no mistake, but maybe the bottom ain't quite as deep as it used to be. This perspective, acknowledging real progress while recognizing its profound limitations, characterizes the twilight of the Gilded Age. The brutal excesses of unregulated industrialization have begun to generate their own counterforces, labor organizations with growing sophistication, reform movements with increasing public support, and a gradual expansion of government's role in protecting citizens from the worst abuses of concentrated economic power. Looking out over the city, you can see signs of this tentative progress amid continuing hardship. The streets below still teem with poverty, but they're marginally cleaner than in your childhood. Children still work, but fewer of the youngest have been freed for at least some schooling. Workers still face exploitation, but they have more tools to resist it collectively. From the vantage point of 1897, the transformative reforms of the Progressive Era remain largely in the future. The Pure Food and Drug Act, effective child labour laws, the 8-hour workday and meaningful workplace safety regulations lie years ahead. But the groundwork for these changes is being laid by the accumulated efforts of millions of ordinary people refusing to accept that human suffering is the inevitable price of progress. Your father points to a distant glow on the horizon, electric lights illuminating the mansions of Fifth Avenue, a technology still unavailable in tenement districts. They get the light first, he observes, but eventually some of it finds its way down to us. This observation captures the halting, uneven nature of progress during this period. Innovations and improvements originating in wealth gradually extend in diminished form to working communities, not through natural diffusion, but through deliberate struggle and advocacy. As you drift towards sleep on the tenement roof, cooler than the stifling rooms below, you find hope not in dramatic transformations, but in accumulated small victories and persistent resistance. The Gilded Age isn't ending with a sudden reversal of fortune, with wealth magically redistributed or power suddenly rebalanced. It's eroding gradually as ordinary people build countervailing forces against its worst excesses. The labour movement, despite brutal setbacks, has established permanence and legitimacy. Women reformers have created institutions addressing human needs the market ignores. Journalists and photographers have made hidden suffering visible to the wider public. Together, these efforts have begun the long process of tempering raw capitalism with consideration for human dignity and well-being. Your own contribution to this larger movement feels small but real, organising fellow workers, supporting community initiatives, passing hard-won knowledge to younger generations. The better world you envision may not arrive in your lifetime, but your efforts, combined with millions of others, push relentlessly in that direction. As you finally surrender to sleep, stars visible above the city's smoke, you carry this complicated legacy of the Gilded Age, a time of extraordinary suffering that nonetheless contained the seeds of essential reforms, a period when the worst of industrial capitalism generated the beginnings of its necessary constraints. In your comfortable modern bed, so far removed from tenement roofs and factory floors, remember that many of the protections and opportunities we now take for granted emerged from this crucible of hardship and resistance. The 8-hour workday, workplace safety regulations, pure food and drug laws, child labour prohibitions, all these began as radical demands from people facing conditions we can scarcely imagine today. Their legacy lives not just in specific reforms, but in the ongoing project of balancing economic dynamism with human dignity, technological progress with social welfare, individual opportunity with collective security. The questions they confronted remain central to our own time. their struggles echoing in contemporary debates about labour rights, economic inequality, and the proper relationship between market forces and human needs. As you drift peacefully towards sleep, perhaps carrying a deeper appreciation for both how far we've come and how much of their work remains unfinished, consider that your own comfort and security rest upon foundations laid by those who endured the harsh realities of the Gilded Age while insisting that America could and should do better.